Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be doing a review of the Specialized Allez Sprint, an aluminum performance bike that has become synonymous with carbon killer tendencies. The bike is not mine, it belongs to a friend of mine, Mark. And if you follow the channel, you know that a few videos back, I announced that I was going to have a few friends take a spin on my modern steel frame made out of Columbus Spirit tubing, so that they could give me and you guys their feedback about what it's like to ride a modern performance steel frame after banging their heads around or rotating their legs around carbon performance bikes for the last 5, 10, or 15 years. So Mark currently has a Dark Star and he asked me to hold on to his bike. A couple of you spotted it on the channel and said, hey, why don't you do a review of that? And that's exactly what this video is all about. So I'm gonna do my normal ride review evaluation, which involves number 1, ease of fit, number 2, initial ride impressions. Then I'm gonna talk about how the bike feels rolling along on the flats, solo and group riding. I'm gonna talk about how it performs in terms of its cornering. I'll also talk a little bit about what I think about it as a climber. And then at the end, after I do my conclusions, I'll talk about who I think this bike is built for. All right, let's go. This is a 22 Allez Sprint in the Water Effect Black colorway. Aluminum frame with a full carbon fork. Bike is size 56. Drivetrain is a Shimano Dura-Ace 9100. I don't know if it's 9120 or 9150. I do know that it's Shimano's last mechanical group set with hydraulic disc brakes. Mark has the bike equipped with a Deda Super Zero cockpit. The bike as it is weighs in right at 18.1 pounds or 8.02 kilograms rather. Drivetrain is a 5339 with an 1129 cassette. Ease of fit. Now this bike is a size 56. Ideally, I should be on a size 54. Now Mark does run the bike with a 100 millimeter stem. I would normally run a bike with a 110 millimeter stem. Besides, I am 5'10", so I should be able to get on a bike like this and make it fit. After I transferred all of my measurements and I did my push off on the bike and I'm riding, after about an hour or so, I started getting a little bit of soreness in my shoulders, and that's because the bike's got me like in this sensation where I feel like I'm tipping forward, so I'm clearly putting more pressure or using my arms more to keep myself in position on the bike. It's not very obvious, it's a little bit subtle, but I kept having this sensation like I'm tipping forward. A couple things to take into consideration. One of them is that this bike has a very low stack, but it also has a 73.5 seat tube angle. And I didn't want to compromise my orientation over the bottom bracket. So the only way for me to remedy that sensation that I was having would have been to lower the saddle and push it back a little bit. So I just decided to live with it. But that certainly was a thing that I experienced with this bike. Now, once I got used to that sensation and was just off and riding the bike, my initial ride impression is that the bike felt eager, not in an annoying kind of like, let's go racing kind of way, but like in a serious, ready to apply power, will respond kind of way, which is a neat sensation of the bike. A couple neat elements of this bike is that because it is disc brakes, that does firm up the suspension somewhat, and you kind of like feel that rigidity without getting that harshness of the transmission like you would normally expect with an aluminum bike. In fact, I would say that I'm not going to say that the ride was compliant, but I would say that it was agreeable. And one of the things that I mentioned in my last video is that tire construction and technology and wheel technology is starting to have an effect on the ride characteristics of bike that is blurring the differences between the frame materials, aluminum, steel, and carbon, and titanium as well, I guess. So that's definitely something to take into consideration. But the responsiveness was there in terms of getting the bike going. I liked the feeling like I can ride this bike all day long. So there wasn't an issue like, oh, this bike is so stiff like old aluminum is. I can't wait to get off of it. It was a very comfortable bike for me to ride. Once I got the bike up to speed and was rolling tempo, the bike just went along at the pace without the feeling of a need for more impetus to keep it there. Of course, you got to keep the power applied, but let's just say it holds its speed very well. It is easy to ride both solo and in a group. In a group or pace line, I felt like I could easily control what the bike would do pace-wise, and it definitely tracks very, very true. Acceleration and responsiveness is what you'd expect from aluminum frame, or let's say an aluminum performance bike. It goes when you push. I did a couple of standing efforts coming out of corners, as well as a few seated efforts coming out of corners, and it was easy for me to either stay on the wheel or close down a 1 or 2 bike length gap that I let go out. The high speed behavior the bike exhibited was very reassuring during our ride's turn up zone. It did what I expected. When it comes to cornering, the bike weighs 18 pounds, and I definitely feel like I need to kind of coax it into the corner a little bit. And I wouldn't expect that with a bike that has a 73.5 seat tube and 73.5 head tube angle. I've got to put that reluctance to turn in to the weight. Now, you get used to it, you know, as an experienced cyclist, the more you ride, you know that this is coming, but man, it really wasn't something that I was expecting. It would be very weird to jump on this bike without being used to it in a crit and expect the bike to be able to just, nah, you'd have to like work on coaxing a bike into those corners a little bit. So that was definitely a weird sensation for me. Hey guys, I wanted to come in and visit you guys from the future to let you know I had a conversation with Mark today after our ride, shared with him some of my findings of the bike. And while I felt like the turn-in of the bike was sluggish, Mark feels like the bike is a little bit twitchy. And I don't know if it's an issue because of what Mark normally rides versus what I'm used to riding, but we clearly had two different sensations in terms of the bike's responsiveness to turn in. I didn't want to come down unduly harsh or appear that way regarding the cornering characteristics of this bike. So I wanted to share that. And also to get your feedback. What is your experience with the Specialized Allez Sprint when it comes to initial turn-in? Do you feel like it's neutral? Do you feel like it's a little bit slow to turn in? Or do you find the bike to be a little bit, like Mark says, a little kind of skittish or exhibit some nervous behavior? All right, Future Lou signing out. Climbing, all I could do in terms of climbing was evaluate the 2 short pitches that I do at Markham Park, 1 seated, 1 standing. I could rock the bike out of the saddle and it felt very solid. While I was either standing or seated and I applied power, the bike just went. But I really haven't had any opportunity to do any, sustained climbing or anything like that. So I really can't speak too much on that. Now, here are my conclusions. Who is this bike made for? If you own this and somebody is like, hey, you should consider upgrading to a Tarmac. Unless you're like seriously racing, and I'm talking about racing things other than crits, I don't think that you're going to get too much of a performance gain from going with a Tarmac over this bike. It performs really, really well. The feelings and the sensation, the compliance and the stiffness is all there. I think where the Tarmac may be better than this is when you start to push. And I'm talking about not weekend warrior pushing. I'm talking about crit racing pushing, because that's a different type of effort altogether. So unless I were racing, I would keep this bike instead of upgrading. But I know that that's the kind of thing people get in your ear and say, you need to graduate from that aluminum frame and get into carbon. If I were to start doing crits, this is not the bike that I would pick. I would go with the Cannondale Cat 10. There's a reason why you're still seeing Cannondale Cat 10s tearing up the circuit in local crit races. And that's because disc brakes rub. I don't care what they say, and I don't care what they try to tell you that the science says and all that kind of stuff. Just because you can't micro feel it doesn't mean that it's not happening. And just based on what you do in a crit, in not just cranking the bike down, but also accelerating at the same time, it flexes. And because it flexes somewhat, you're going to get some degree of brake rub. So I would choose the Cannondale Cat 10 in rim brake if I were to go racing. Now, if you're a weekend warrior and what you do every Saturday and Sunday is go out there and bang it out with your friends, this is your bike, especially if you don't want to go spending a whole bunch of coin. I think it's a phenomenal bike for the weekend warrior. But that's kind of like my take my review on it. I've had it on enough rides for me to be able to get a very good feeling of what it's like. I've also spoken to Mark about the bike, and we have some of the same kind of sensations about it. Mark feels like it beats him up a little bit more than I think it beats me up. And part of that is because Mark has been riding around a very sophisticated time for quite some time. But what I'm curious to know is that if you owned one of these and you upgraded to a Tarmac, let me know how you feel about that. Do you think it was worth it? Do you think that you garnered a huge benefit as a result of it? I'd really like to get your take on that. And if you own one of these and you're thinking about upgrading, let us know about that as well. All right, guys, that's our evaluation. Thank you for continuing to support the channel by watching these videos, by liking, by commenting, and subscribing. As always, our aim here is to inform, instruct, inspire. Be blessed.